Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Croccast podcast. I'm your host, Nate, and today I'm joined by Mr. Ron St. Pierre. Ron, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
So, you want to get started on how you first got into reptiles and your career path up to this point?
Yeah, I have the same story a lot of people have. I started out as a little kid growing up in Miami, spending my days in my yard catching, little anoles and skinks and stuff like that. And it just kind of snowballed. And by the time I was 16 years old, I was a commercial collector in Miami for non-native species of lizards that were established there in the late 70s, early 80s. And so I started supplying all the local reptile importers, dealers as a kid, and it just kept going. So right around the time I was like 18 or 19, so we're talking about like 1988 or so, I started breeding my first herps, which was Burmese pythons and bearded dragons. And those were the first two things that I bred at that time. But my interests were always much far beyond that. I mean, at this point in my career, I can't even begin to name all the species that I've bred on some sort of a scale. Everything from tree frogs to tortoises to water turtles and a lot of snakes, but primarily my more or less specialty has been lizards. So it's been a lot of different lizard species. So um, yeah, I mean, I was a commercial collector really up until 1992 when Hurricane Andrew um, basically decimated South Florida and destroyed all the places that I used to catch all these anole species. And that forced me really on the hard track to commercial herpetoculture, which I still do today. So that was kind of the pivot point for me. That prior to that, I was a hobby breeder on the side, but most of my income and way of life came from catching the various anoles and supplying them to the United States. And actually, a lot of that stuff got shipped overseas, so it went all around the world. So, and now I'm here today. um, Still do a lot of different stuff. We're working on. We have a large scale project to get um, the crown giant species of anoles, you know, uh, done on a reliable scale, which is something we're still in the process. I've been working on that for 9 years, but it's almost mature. This was the first year we actually started rolling a lot of them out to the public, and that consists of both species like Anolis equestris podior and Ludogalaris and a bunch of those, Rycrodi, and as well as morphs and mutations of the common equestris that's found in Florida. So, we produce lace monitors and um, lots of bearded dragons, lots of blue tongue skinks, just a lot of different stuff. I'm probably forgetting. I'm sure I know I'm forgetting a bunch of stuff, but that's just the main things right now. So,
So, what kind of got you into breeding Anolis equestris?
um, well, I mean, like I said, that animal was I mean, so when I was 10 years old, my parents, because I had badgered them to no end to get me a pet iguana, but they took me to a pet store and they wouldn't let me get an iguana because iguanas got too big. My mom knew that they got 6 feet. So they ended up actually buying me a Cuban Anole, Anolis equestris, and um, we didn't know at the time that they were actually found in our neighborhood. So because we never saw them, and so my parents bought me one, and that was my first like real herp. Um, and then when I discovered a couple years later that I could just go out in my neighborhood and ride my bike down the sidewalk and literally pluck these right off of all the trees, that's what kind of uh, turned into the commercial anole collecting. Then I found a book written by Louis Porras in the 1960s about introduced species in Florida, and it had all the locations of where all these things were. So I started going to these spots as I could, and I would take the bus and Metro Rail and all that just to get to some of these kind of out of the way locations. And I found that these species were still there and in abundance. So eventually I met some local reptile dealers and I started that. But so I've had a relationship with that lizard for a very long time. But I never really considered, any sort of herpetocultural endeavor with them because they were, they're harvested in large numbers every year in South Florida. They're very cheap. You can't really justify the cage space or the cost to produce. So, but in 2013, so a kid down in South Florida caught an albino, and when they initially caught it, they sent me a photo, and I kind of laughed at it. I was like, oh, that's a novelty, it's cool and all, but I'm not interested in that. I passed on it. But I also at the same time thought, wow, this is kind of neat, never seen one of these. So I threw it up on Facebook, and then I went off to do my work outside for the day with all the animals. And I came back inside. I left my phone inside, and when I came back inside like 2 hours later, my phone it was popping. And so I looked at it and I was like, huh. So I walked over and opened up my phone, and there was a ton of messages from a lot of other professional breeders. Oh, who has that? How much is it? And I was like, huh, people are actually care about this. So then immediately I panicked and I was like, okay, well, I just alerted the world that this thing exists and there's probably like 20 people trying to track this down. So I called the kid back right away and I said, I'll take it. And I hopped in my car, ran to the bank, got him the money that he wanted, and did a 4-hour drive south in about 2.5 hours. I don't think I've ever hauled ass that fast before, but so I got down there, I met the kid, and he was in this terrible neighborhood. It was like really bad place. And I pulled up and he's standing on the side in front of this convenience store, and he walks up to my truck with this dirty McDonald's bag that's been all kind of rolled up, and he hands me the bag. I mean, it must have looked like a drug deal to an outsider. And I handed this kid the money, and then I opened up the bag, and it was a half dead baby albino anole in this bag. So I was like, whatever, I think I can get this turned around. So I left. About halfway home, I stopped at a Burger King and got it some water out of the water fountain, and it drank off my fingers. And then I was like, okay, well, that's a good sign, because it was on death's door when I got it. But I got it home, and it rebounded really quickly. And within a year, I produced the first hets. And from then I decided, okay, well, this is pretty interesting. This is actually kind of fun. So I started looking around for all the other crown giants that were available in the U.S. from different people. And so I started picking them up here and there. And then I also contacted all the importers and dealers in Miami and said, hey, anybody brings in a weird Cuban anole, I'll buy it. I'll pay you, X amount, way over what the normal ones would sell for them, depending on how unusual. And that led to me getting T negative albinos, T positive albinos, and then 4 or 5 other mutations that I'm in the process of proving out, that some of them are pretty radical. So, and we've gotten a lot of interest off of that from, herpetoculturists across the United States and across the world. Unfortunately, it's difficult to export those. So I don't know if they'll ever make it across the pond or not, but, and then I ended up picking up some Anolis luteolaris, and a big group of Anolis podior came up for sale. So I grabbed that, and then it just really snowballed. And now I have a building full of them, and it continues to expand every year. So it's turned into much more than I ever thought it would. 9 years ago, I thought this was just going to be a little side project thing that I did and wouldn't be the primary focus. But now it's pretty much my primary focus of what, and my girlfriend is Heather Moy, who's also a professional herpetoculturist. So her and I have a pretty large farm now, and she works on blue tongues and banana pectinana and things like that. And I primarily work on anoles and, up until this point, large monitor lizards, lace monitors in particular, but also Spencer's, Goanna, and Mertens. But it looks like they're probably going to end up being banned in the state. So those projects are probably short-lived for me anyway. So
Yeah, so
that's kind of how
kind
I
of a
got here.
yeah, so kind of a deviation off of course of our conversation so far. You want to talk about this new proposed Florida regulations?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one of those guys that's going to, scream about any regulation. I think some regulations are probably necessary. There are, most of the mess here has been made by a very small number of people. It really is a couple of, how can I put this? I guess negligent actors that were importers and allowed large numbers of these, or intentionally released large numbers of these species. That's definitely the case with the tegu. It's certainly the case with the Burmese python. I think, there's a lot of rumors and a lot of misinformation that runs around about it all, but the Burmese pretty much go back to a Vietnam shipment in, I think, 94. I believe Crutchfield talks about it in his book on giant snakes that came out recently. And then the Tegus was a single bad actor who had imported a ton of adults from Argentina. He couldn't sell them, so because they were all beat up, they were missing tails and limbs, and they were like farmed animals that were probably raised in huge numbers in enclosures. And Tegus are brutal. So rather than, do anything reasonable with them, he just opened his enclosures and let them go. And they've turned into this mess that we have down here. The iguanas go back at least to the 1950s in Miami. Nobody really knows how they got there, where they came from. But when I was a kid in the 70s, my mom and dad used to take me to the parks there, and the parks were full of green iguanas. So by that time, they were already well established in Miami and South Florida. So that one's a bit of a mystery. Could have been the pet trade. It could have just as likely been the nurseries. There's even people that have thought that may have actually at one time been part of iguana's range to some degree, because they are found spread out throughout the Caribbean. But I mean, humans move stuff around, so maybe humans, 100 years ago moved them around. But regardless, so we definitely
Kind of
need
like
some
those,
regulation.
kind of like those old stories of boa constrictors and banana shipments, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And that still does occasionally happen. I know someone who owns a grocery store in, I think, in New Jersey, and recently they got a shipment of bananas and there was an anole in there. So it does happen. I mean, even to this day, it's kind of cool when that happens. But yeah, so I mean, I mean, the regulations have definitely been taken too far. These bans are not, um, they're really not well thought out, because if you make all this stuff illegal and it literally happens pretty much overnight. They give you a little bit of warning, but then they decide, okay, we're going to ban this, and then you have 90 days to meet an incredibly difficult series of um, uh, standards, extremely expensive, cost prohibitive, and not, in many cases, not even in the best interest of the animals. You have to meet this, and that's just to be grandfathered in for an additional 3 years. And by that time, you have to be they all have to be completely gone. So it's not even really a grandfather clause. So that's very, and I'm quite sure a lot of people are just not getting permits now, and they're keeping their animals, and they're just doing it on the down low. The people that had those animals, which there was a ton of tegus in the state. There was a lot of Burmese pythons in the state, a lot of retics. So now people are just going underground with them, and that's a problem. I think they need to have some good, smart, laws in place. I mean, it's probably too easy to get a reticulated python or a water monitor or these big animals that, most people can't honestly take care of. So, but there should be a pathway, I feel, for, people that really are serious about it, that really want to do it. And if you have a realistic pathway to that, and you have, some regulation on that, you can't just, do what you want with them. I'm not against that. I think that might actually be necessary. But so I don't know. It's a slippery slope here. I think, um, it just, right now, in the past, FWC has always worked with the industry to make laws that were common sense, that, they had good laws in place. Species of special concern, there was good regulation. They had no issues at all with it. It went on for years. I'm not exactly sure how long, but it was a successful regulation campaign. And then something changed, and I don't know exactly what it was, but all of a sudden they just had a totally different outlook, and they just started banning things. And they have thus far not exactly been receptive to comments from the public or from the industry. So I think, I don't know. I honestly don't know where it's going. It's made it hard for us to plan our future, because we don't know really what's on the chopping block. Some of the things were surprising, but I recently got a hold of the list that they have, that the state has, of animals they're looking at, and how they classify them as whether they're high risk, medium risk, or low risk. And some of them they have a super high risk designation as well. So that seems to be relatively pragmatic, how they're coming up with that. There are things on there. They definitely found some things low risk. And so it's not like they're just, stamping high risk on everything that could possibly live in this environment and banning it. So that gives me some hope that, there's some reasonable thought going on there. But it's just a mess. So we've been tailoring our business and our livelihood towards things that I know that they would not find high risk. Things that have already been cleared, like the giant anoles. They were actually introduced in Florida by the University of Miami in the 1950s as an experiment to see if an introduced species could thrive in South Florida, and clearly that was very successful. They've spread up both coasts. They're even up in the middle. They're all the way up to Central Florida, and all the way down to the end of the Keys. They cover about probably 60% of the state now. They're also non-invasive. They inhabit only areas where humans have disturbed the habitat, and there was nothing else anyway. No native stuff survived the urbanization. The anoles do really well in that environment. They adapt well to that, which is why, they're the most studied. I believe they're the most studied organism on the planet as far as evolutionary biology. There's been anoles have been the subject of tons of papers and books on that subject, because of their adaptive ability, and how quickly they will evolve. So, I mean, but they're non-invasive so far. They don't classify them as invasive. They're just introduced. So, seems smart.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah. Miami University, great success with that one.
Right.
So you said that, at least in the past, not so certain about going forward, but in the past you've bred a lot of large monitor lizards. You want to go in on your experience working with those species?
Yeah, I mean, I started. I mean, so I am the guy, for better or for worse, that was a big tegu guy and cyclura guy in the 90s. I'm the one who brought the blue tegu and the albino blue tegu to the U.S. pet trade. So that was all my initial work. But that eventually, my work with tegus eventually led me to work with varanids. And in the mid 90s up until the early 2000s, I was one of the few successful breeders of Salvadori, the crocodile monitor, which I bred for a few years. And then also at that, and once I was successful with that, I started working with other ones. So starting from back then, I bred a bunch of different monitors, mostly the dwarf species. The albigularis, the white throat from South Africa, was one that I did a lot of. Recently, I've been really focused on the animal that when I got into this, 40 years ago, I really was at the top of my one day I want to work with, and that's the lace monitor. And I finally got him 3 or 4 years ago. And since that time, we produced a few good clutches. We have a good clutch in the incubator right now. And hoping maybe we'll get another one before too long. And we also produce the Mertens. The Spencers Spencer's Guiana is another one we work on, but we haven't really, we've just gotten infertile eggs each year. So there's something I'm not hitting on there. But, with the legislation coming and a personal health issue, I had a hypertensive event or whatever they call it recently, which has forced me to radically change my lifestyle and diet. I just drove myself into the ground with stress and eating. I'm a stress eater, so the more stressed I got, the worse I ate. And I wound up in the hospital recently with a 202 over 110 blood pressure, and found out I was a diabetic. And so anyway, what that's done is I got to take it easy for a few months now. And Heather can't take care of all these giant monitors by herself, which we had about 40 of them here. So we started, a lot of them were breeding loans, so we started sending them back to the owners, and the other ones we recently sold a large portion of that collection. So there was really two reasons for it. One is that I won't be able to do anything with them for a couple of months, and I didn't want them to suffer any lack of, not being like perfect. And the other thing was, looking at this potential legislation, if they surprise me with it, which they are looking at Varanus as a block. So they're not even looking at individual species. They have it listed as Varanus SP. So of course, if you're taking an entire genus like that, and your criteria is if one of them is listed as very high threat, which they already have that in the Nile monitor because the Nile monitor is established here. That's gonna, they're gonna ban them. So did I lose you?
No, you haven't lost me. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's all good. So yeah, man, that's kind of where I'm at with that. I've just been working on them, but I think that's probably going to go. If for some reason in 9 months when the monitors start to hatch again, if they haven't banned them and I feel like then I'll probably will restart the lace monitors. But I think I'm going to let the rest of them go. So, anyway, the Anole thing has grown to such a point, and the blue tongue collection is getting larger by the year. So we really needed to kind of streamline a little bit, bite down hard on things that we're really that we really are working towards for the future. So it's probably a good thing in some ways. So that's kind of my thought behind it. But yeah, the croc monitors were an amazing ride in the 90s. That really got me thinking about all the different things that could be done at the time. There were a lot of species that people thought, they're too difficult to breed, you can't really do them, the requirements are too hard. But the truth is that almost everything is usually just some basic parameters, and maybe in some cases an occasional odd thing. And for the croc monitors, it was basically the building of a fake termite mound, giving them a nesting area that simulated a termite nest, which I did by accident. honestly, it wasn't even intentional. I had a garbage can that I filled with. I cut the top out. I cut a hole in the top and filled it with leaf litter because I couldn't get them to lay in the typical, burrow situation. So the females would hold the eggs too long and then just dump them all over the ground, and then obviously they wouldn't hatch. And then I had a phone conversation with Frank Reedus, and he was like, "Well, they have um, these giant staghorn plants that are in the trees where that monitor comes from, and they probably rip those apart and lay their eggs in those." So that's what I was trying to mimic. And what they really do is they lay their eggs in termite mounds that are in trees. So I accidentally, without knowing, gave them that option, and it changed the game for that. And the one female that I had would religiously lay her eggs in those. And I mean, nowadays everybody uses that method in a slightly different way using cocoa fiber, which is what we use for the lace monitors. They're also a termite nester. So you give them this fake termite mound, a hard shelled single entry point, basically large tote that's completely overpacked with cocoa fiber. And they will start at the entrance at the only place they can, and they will dig into it every time and lay their eggs perfectly. So it's pretty, now it's a common practice, but in the 90s, that was just a weird thing. And like I said, it was an accident. But once I realized that, then I was like, okay, well, there's all this other stuff so I started working on all these different lizards, and I still do that. I mean, that's kind of what the Anole project is. And, it's just like one of those things. Nobody cares about it. So I was like, okay, well, maybe this will actually be something if we push it hard enough. And I just got home from Daytona last weekend, where there's the first time I actually took a large number of captive born Anole, giant Anoles. And my voice was shot by the end of Sunday. It was unbelievable how many people came to see that. So I was like feeling really good about that, because I wasn't sure. I was like, man, if I build this, will they actually come? And yeah, they did. So it was pretty cool. So I'm kind of riding off that high still.
So, if is there any other monitor species you wish to work with someday?
Honestly, I think at this point I've pretty much done everything I wanted to do with. I mean, I would like to have parentes, but I think that's a pipe dream. Although I thought that I would never have Bell's phase lace monitors either, and at one point, I had 9 of them here. So I guess it's still within the realm of possibility. There are some in zoos in the United States, and if they ever had a surplus, I could see them filtering out. But that would probably be the only one. Other than that, I'm sort of more interested now in other species of anoles and some of the larger gametes from Indonesia and Southeast Asia, that are not really producing captivity. Or now I'm starting to kind of look towards that. So I don't know. We might, because my girlfriend, her thing, she really has an interest in the larger gametes. So I was looking at that going, maybe we can figure these out and make it work, in Florida, in a kind of an indoor-outdoor situation. So that's kind of where I'm currently, my mind currently is at. So
you, with the Anole sequestris, you have albinos, you have T positive, T negative, all those. What are some other mutations that you have proved out, or you're in the process of proving out right now?
Well, we're in the process of proving out, I think 5 different ones that should all prove one way or the other in 2023. So pretty soon. It's coming up pretty quick. I have hets on the ground, or if they're recessive. In most of these cases, I'm fairly confident that they're going to prove out. These things are so radical that usually when you see mutations like this, they almost always prove out. So we have these we have this one thing we call Project X, which is this bizarre. It's about 80% canary yellow, but it has like green modeling infused in it. It was collected off a tree in Miami last year, and we got it. We picked it up from a guy named Nick Lillis who bought it, and then he sent it to us. That animal has proven to be extremely prolific, and and the funny thing, I didn't actually have any normal males to breed this thing to, but after we set up here we're in Orlando in Kissimmee. After we set up here, we started finding wild night anoles trying to get into our enclosures. And it was always males trying to get in and breed with the females. And this one particular one was extremely persistent. I would pull him off the cages, walk him out to one of the trees where he lives, put him back in the trees. He'd come right back. So finally I was like, oh, well, I needed a male. And this one's definitely doesn't have any, it's not head for anything. So I was like, all right, you want in that cage? Here you go. So he's the father. So I have hets on the ground from that. And I'm fairly confident that'll prove out. Another one is this bizarre thing that a breeder named Ian Bissell, who's a chondro tree boa guy that lives in Palm Beach. He was watering a tree in his backyard, and out of the ground in front of him came a hatchling anole that just started walking up the tree in front of him. And it was, I don't even know what it is. It's like an albino, but it's not an albino. It's this pale yellow it has a white stomach. And initially when it was born, it had a translucent stomach. You could see its organs through its scales, but now it's turned white. And it's a bizarre animal. I mean, it sort of resembles a coral glow ball python, banana ball python. It's kind of like that. It may be a similar type mutation to what's found in that thing, but so that's that, and that I'm confident will prove out this year. There's another one. This kid keeps catching these ones with solid blue stomachs. Only the stomach is bright blue, like the entire vent, all the way to the tip of the tail on the underside, and then the top of the animal, the dorsal, has this strange yellow flecking all over it. So it's pretty radical. So I got 2 of those from this kid, but he's caught a bunch of them. So I'm sure that's a genetic mutation of some sort, because you can't have so many, replicas of it in this one little area. So that's about to prove out. T positive, T negative, the Lillis animal, the cell animal, the blue belly. I think that's it for now. We had a piebald one, but it didn't survive, unfortunately. That would have been pretty killer if that would have kept going. But so yeah, so I mean, just that alone, the combos and stuff should prove to be interesting over time. And then we've divided it off, and we work really hard with Anolis ludicularis. We entered that project. That was a joint project with Philippe de Vaugelet. He wasn't able to get them to breed in the indoor area that he had them. So he sent them down to me. I had 2 females that I had picked up from Phil Trimper that were just sitting in doing nothing. So he sent me those, and they turned out, once I got them here and got them set up, they turned out to be one of the most prolific species. And now we have, between him and I, we each have around 20 adults. So we've got a nice block of 40 of them. And this year I'm selling a lot of babies. So they're extremely prolific. So that animal should be established in some capacity very soon. And that's a very impressive anole. It's different than all the rest of them. So, and we're in the process of doing that with Anolis rhycridae as well, which is much less prolific and more difficult, but we've got that figured out. So, yeah, so that's where we're at with that.
Yeah. So, for people who've never kept Cuban Knight Anoles before, what would you say they're like as a captive animal?
Actually, very simple, and kept indoors, they're very tame. Like if the babies that I've raised indoors totally different animal from the ones that I keep outside. The ones that I keep outdoors, they're more like what you would expect. They're aggressive, you know, they don't want to, they're difficult to pick up, you know, hang on a minute, my dog has decided to join us. Go lay down. Yeah, they're really, I don't know if you can hear that, but
Barely.
yeah, it's an Alapaha blue blood bulldog, and when it drinks, the whole house knows. All right, as long as it's not really coming over because it's super loud in here. Yeah, come on. All right, there she goes. Okay, sorry. What were we talking about?
Cuban Knight Anoles captives, especially ones
Oh,
raised
yeah.
indoors.
Right. Yeah. So they're super tame indoors. And their care is actually very straightforward, very simple. They're if I had to, you know, correlate them to another species, I would say they're similar to crested geckos, but with a higher temperature and a UV requirement. So, you know, we use 18 by 18 by 36-inch enclosures with, you know, with a single live tree. We use a tree called a mass cane, and then you know, and then a cork log, and that's pretty much, you know, what that's like the bare minimum for a pair. Obviously, if you get in larger spaces or you fill the enclosures with more, you know, branches and stuff, it's better. But because, you know, we're doing this on a commercial scale, I have to keep it somewhat simple because they lay one egg every 7 days, and that egg can be very difficult to find. So I use a stripped down version, but if I was keeping them as pets, you know, I'd give them a much larger enclosure. They're perfectly suited for bioactive, large planted enclosures. They eat a lot of fruit. They eat the rapashi crested gecko diets. Um, they eat a lot of grub type insects, hornworms, superworms, things like that. Crickets. Very simple, very straightforward. Um, the only thing that I really do that's probably a little different is that I water them at night. So, but as the lights go out, I heavily spray all their enclosures, and then I leave that so that they have all night to drink. Because most anoles drink dew, and they do that, you know, between the hours of like 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. whenever the dew settles. And almost all anoles get their water intake that way when it's not raining. So this way it somewhat simulates both effects. They get a heavy spray, which acts like a rain, and then it lasts all night so they can take it in all night. So I found that trying to water them in the daytime actually was not enough. So it's kind of like, you know, trying to fill a glass with a hole in it when you're watering them during the day, because as fast as you're putting the water in, you're taking it right out with you know, with heat bulbs and stuff like that. So when you do it at night, though, they've got a good 10, 12 hours to just take as much in. Their body gets to use it for a long period of time. So it kind of maximizes it. That's the only husbandry tactic that I use, which, you know, it's not revolutionary or anything, but a lot of people don't do it that way. They water it in the morning, and then they'll water it, you know, at some point during the day. That's how most people spray stuff. But I just couldn't. I felt like they were always teetering on dehydration when I was doing that. But once I changed to a nighttime water, that made a big difference. So cleared up all the husbandry issues that I was seeing with them previous. And it probably it's probably extremely beneficial for anything that's, you know, a desert species that would get most of its water that way through dew, and any of the tropical animals that don't live directly, you know, near standing water of any kind. So
You also mentioned you do a lot of work with blue tongue skinks. You want to go on that at all?
yeah, I mean, blue tongues are a thing that Heather and I really got into when we got together. She had an interest in them, and I've bred them in the past multiple times, lots of species. But you know, we I got a breeding loan from a friend who had all of the available mutations of easterns and northerns and Sumerian Jayas that were also some potential mutations. So we have a very large group of them. We have, the hypermelanistics, the albinos, the some new kind of T positive albino from Indonesia that actually hasn't been bred yet, but I'm expecting those to produce this year. Patternless animals that are basically zeros. They have no pattern at all. And then we work with there's more morphs too that I'm just not thinking of right now. I'm drawing a blank. But then we have pure easterns. We have pure Taliqua nigrolatia. We have occipitalis, the westerns. I think that's it. We have Halamaheras, and then peppered into all that is various morphs and combos and stuff like that. So we haven't really been selling any blue tongues yet. That's kind of a thing that once we have enough, then we'll start rolling those out. But yeah, we do those outdoors year round in Florida in these large enclosures where we keep a pair to. We basically treat them like lizards. A lot of people that keep blue tongues don't treat them like lizards. They have this kind of weird. It's kind of like a cross between like a ball python and like a puppy. I haven't really, but that I just can't. It just doesn't work for me. Yeah, and it's kind of funny. We set them up in these large enclosures, and then I backfilled them all with leaf litter, and they have underground hiding areas. And we noticed that we would put food in there, and they weren't really eating, but they were still fat. And I was like, man, that's weird. Why? What's going on? And so I didn't really question it much. As long as they were healthy and solid, it wasn't really a concern. And we figured it out when babies were born, and we pulled the tubes out that they burrow into, and we were, getting the babies out of tubes, and all these giant roaches were coming out. And what happened was we've accidentally created an environment for the native Florida. Florida has a native burrowing roach that's fairly large. Well, when we created these environments, we created the perfect place for those, and the blue tongues gorge themselves on them. So they get all this free food every day whenever they want, and they're just living in the enclosures. So it's been kind of funny, but yeah, we feed them a lot of insects, and not only the ones they catch in their own enclosures, but we feed them hornworms and superworms and stuff like that. I think that animal, when we also give them a lot of fruit, that animal is just, I don't feel like a straight cat food diet is sufficient for them. They really are, they're kind of an omnivore that bops around all day, when they can, and grabbing whatever they can find, whether that's fruit or grubs or I'm sure they eat everything, but so we give them a wide variety, and it's worked really well. Our production rate has been very high compared to the feedback I get from other people that have attempted it, on some kind of scale. There's a lot of them produced every year, but the production rate seems to be pretty low. And I was surprised that it just ended up working this way. So I think it's probably not so much what we're doing. I think it has to do with the fact that they can eat whenever the hell they want. And they're getting these large, wild roaches that are full of nutrients and things. It's not like a deficient commercially bred food source. So not going to mess with it as long as it's working. I'm happy. So
yeah,
yeah,
you got the golden goose there. Don't mess with it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, blue tongues are really fun. They're fun to work with. It's a nice size animal. They come in a wide variety of cool species and cool colors, and there's a lot of stuff you can do with them selectively. So they're actually a lot of fun. I really like them. It's just been something we work on.
Yeah. You also mentioned that one of the first reptiles you bred was bearded dragons. You still work with that species at all?
Yeah, so that's primarily what Heather did for a long time. She owns Fairy Tale Dragons, which is the company that we both operate under these days, and she was selectively breeding dragons for about 18 years. I bred bearded dragons going all the way back to 1988, but they weren't so basically I have always done them on a commercial scale to be able to pay for all of the bizarre side projects that I've attempted to do that were for me. But I mean, even producing very expensive Varanids, by the time you spend all the food, all the money that's required, you really don't make anything off of that. So it's kind of like that's something people that breed monitors do it because they love it, because there's just really no financial gain to be had there for the most part. They're unreliable. It costs a lot of money, the whole thing. So, but bearded dragons are extremely reliable. And if you're trying to do this for a living, which is what I do, have always done, you really need that. You either need that or you need ball pythons, or you need crested get. You need one of those pillar species that you produce a few thousand a year that, can cover all your bills, and, so then you can go off and do crazy stuff that no one cares about. So, yeah, so I'd always done them, but I never bothered with the morphs and anything else. And then, but she's one of those people that took them to a whole different level. I mean, she kind of built off of what Sandfire Dragon, Bob Mayhew did in the 90s, and just kept going with it. Now we on this property, we produce, they're still our bread and butter. They pay the bills, and they allow us to work on these other things. And maybe over time that'll be somewhat replaced by the blue tongues and maybe even the anoles. I don't really know where that's going yet, but for now, yeah, we produce a lot of dragons here, and I don't even know half of the morphs that she produces. I just walk by and go, oh my God, that's amazing. And that I stay out of her way. I don't interfere with that in any way. So yeah, it's we have a lot of bearded dragons here. I'm sitting in a house right now that the whole living room is completely full of them because it's baby season, and they're all over the place. Some in the building outside, some in the house, and then she has these large outdoor. We breed them outside here too. I figured out a long time ago how to set them up so that you could actually breed the Australian dry species in Florida. So there's two reasons why we can pull that off. One is that we live in the part of Florida that's relatively dry. We have gopher tortoises naturally here, and when you have gopher tortoises, you have white sand, which means you have good drainage. And all of my properties that I've lived on previous, I've always used that as a criteria. I won't move to any place that has a black soil, because that means it floods, or it has a high rain amount. So I always go to places in Florida that are high and dry. So that allows us to do them outside somewhat, but there are things that we do to deal with excessive amounts of rain and stuff like that. So that's that.
So, do you have any planned projects outside of your Anolis and all your other projects we've gone before? Do you have any other projects going forward you want to start up or looking to start up?
Yeah, I mean, we're moving to a new system. That's so we have a 2,000 square foot building on the property that's largely unused so far. We've only been here for a couple of years, and it's currently half storage, half indoor outdoor setup for the anoles. But we're gonna gut that building and go with the entirety. We're gonna outfit it completely in these all custom all glass enclosures to do large scale oddball lizards indoors, but ones that'll fit a certain set of parameters that we have. They have to be able to take the heat. They have to be able to take some of the cold, things like that. So we're looking at a lot of different stuff that can fit in that system. And I could see myself eventually maybe messing around with things like Amazon tree boas, we're looking at frill dragons, some of the other Indonesian, agamids, the larger agamids, the ones that can withstand, low 90s. So anything that's really cool, cool weather, I need to stay away from just because it's just so hot. But I'm also though, and as I say that, we also picked up a swamp cooler recently, and I really like how you can drop the temperatures in an open building with by a couple of degrees with one of those. So I was looking at that going, well, if we ran two of them on here, one on each side of the building, maybe we could drop the temperatures enough that we could, keep it at 85 all the time. And that would open up some other things. So yeah, I mean, I foresee a diverse collection of primarily arboreal type things. Um, I just like things that live in trees. She loves things that live in trees. So, and I also like doing things that are not, done by everybody else. So so we're looking at a bunch of stuff right now. I could see in the near future, besides adding a bunch more knolls that I'm actively trying to track down that I don't have, I could see some side things going with maybe another one that I'm trying to get is Polychrys peruvianus, the giant Peruvian polychrys lizard, which is just an amazing animal. And I've been seeing them in the States more and more recently. So I was like, okay, when people start hatching those, that's something I really want. And so, yeah, those kind of strange things are on the top of the list, stuff that I haven't worked with before, stuff that we think is interesting, stuff that I feel is not represented well in the hobby currently. And, um, I think our focus is more and more on the hardcore sector of the serious keeper sector of the hobby, and less on the, the starting hobbyist kind of thing. We do produce stuff, obviously bearded dragons and blue tongue skinks. That's primarily who buys those. But, um, I personally am very interested in things that are different and difficult and, challenging, because otherwise that's the thing is I get bored, and then once I've mastered something, I have a bad habit of saying, okay, I've done this, I proved that I could do it, and I'm now going to move on to the next thing. That's not very conducive though to running a business. So so I've had to curtail some of that, because as soon as I get things worked out where I have the system down and it's starting to crank out, then I'm like, okay, on to the next thing, and the whole process starts over again. So that's what this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to mitigate that.
Yeah, I know what that feels like. So you mentioned one of your first species bred was Burmese pythons, and also you want to maybe get into Amazon tree boas. So do you have any current snake projects you're working on?
Not at the moment. I'm looking. So oddly enough, blood pythons are something that I've always. So blood pythons and Sanzinia are two things that I could definitely. I mean, I think probably within the next couple of years, we'll definitely have both of those going at some degree, particularly Sanzinia. I've had Sanzinia off and on over the years, and when I was growing up, when I was a kid, I used to work for this guy named Ed Chapman, who owned Florida Reptile Importers. And I used to go to his shop all the time. Well, he had a serious interest in Sanzinia, and he had a ton of giant green, when I say giant, I just mean adult green Sanzinia. And I used to spend hours just staring at those. And we had all these glass enclosures, and they're like I'm a huge fan of the pit vipers, particularly the arboreal vipers, but also things like gaboons and rhinos. But because of the laws here and the venomous thing, I just never. I've kept gaboons and stuff when I was a kid, but when I got older, and my kid was born, and my ex-wife at the time wasn't having anything with venomous, so I haven't kept them since then. But Sanzinia kind of give you that viper. You get that viper look out of them without the the venom side, and so and so every time I look at those,
guess it's kind of like a arboreal viper boa,
Pretty
a little
much,
bit.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So those and Amazon basin emeralds are two of the things that probably the last two things that are very high on my list. They were right underneath lace monitors, and so I mean, eventually I will get around to getting those. Actually, once this tank system is done and the anoles are really rocking, I could see dedicating an entire row in that building to tree boas. That way I can get my snake fix out of the way. That's sort of the reason why we're building the system. It has baked in mind these other things. So it'll be easy to just go from, from point A to point B because the system's already in place. So that's kind of that's actually my main focus for the next year, is to get this finished. So be nice if I can get it finished by winter, but I'm not going to hold my breath because these things always take way longer than you expect. But yeah, so I figured if I have to get rid of my monitors because the state's, going to ban them or whatever, then I'm going to get the other things that are on that list that I've never gotten that I have access to now.
Yeah.
And besides, there's a guy with solid black Amazon basin emerald tree boas that are just freaking amazing. Yep.
That does sound kind of otherworldly.
Dude, they are the first time I saw him, I was like, oh my God, I need that. And I think he's actually in the process of producing those. And so when those come out, I imagine the price tag is going to be unbelievable. But I have an investor that I can call and say, hey, dude, this is available. We can do this. So I'll get them. But yeah, man, I was sent a photo of them initially when they were down in South America, and I was like, oh my God. But the price was just way out of my reach. And then I saw them on people in the US had them. So I was like, oh, well, look at that. It's like a couple years later. So yeah, they're amazing. A black emerald tree boa is just crazy. I mean,
Amazon basin too.
yeah, it's a basin. So I mean, just the regular basins are amazing. I mean, I'm kind of torn between which one is cooler, but I mean, why not have both? So yeah, very high on my priority list. Probably those two are the two top things. If I had to push for something, it would be Sanzinia and Amazon basins.
Yeah, not gonna lie, if someone sent me a picture of a solid black tree boa, I would have probably thought they just photoshopped it. But
right, yep. And that's actually what I did think the first time I saw it. They were like, no, I was talking to a buddy of mine who's an importer, and he's like, no, it's been down there for a couple of years. I think they wanted 25 or 30,000 for it in the in where it was. So I don't know what those would sell for in the United States if they were produced.
yeah,
Amazon basins, man, some of those guys get just insane money for the really, the high white ones and stuff like that. And the prices have never gone down. They've always been very stable. I mean, it's an iconic animal that, if you're a hardcore herper, more than likely those are on your list of, I hope to work with one day kind of thing. They've certainly been on mine for a very long time. So
yeah. So where can people find your business online at?
I mean, we have a website. It's fairytaledragons.com. It's fairytale with a TAIL. And then also on Facebook, that's the business site is Fairytale Dragons. That's on Facebook, Instagram. I have a personal page where you can follow me at Ron St. Pierre on Facebook and Instagram. Yeah, I mean, we don't really have much of a commercial footprint, honestly. We do a couple big shows a year. We have I personally have a 40-year client list, people that just buy from me, and hers is almost 20 years deep now. So a lot of stuff we don't ever have to advertise. We are in Morph Market too now, though. We do have a Morph Market thing. So I think it's Fairytale Dragons on Morph Market. So we have a little bit, I think she tries to list every 2 weeks on there with any surplus. But yeah, it's pretty much one of these things where you just send me a message, hey, I'm looking for this, and if we produce it, then we drop people a message and when we have it. So, but yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've certainly had a fun time talking to you. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot for having me, dude. And it was good to chat with you. So,
All right.
all right.
Thank you.
All right, bud. Have a good night.